His suit's sensors flickered, momentary warmth reading, faint and vanishing. He froze. Rechecked. Nothing. He tightened his grip on the compact carbine slung across his chest. Every instinct in his body told him to stay alert. He wasn't a soldier anymore. Not technically, but instincts didn't vanish when you left the battlefield. Not after what he'd seen on Nova Ravelin. Not after the skirmish at Ardent Junction, where he had pulled 6 men out of a burning drop shuttle and left the 7th behind. His boots echoed as he crossed into what was once the ops deck. The ceiling had partially collapsed. Steel girders punched through shattered consoles. Emergency lights flickered overhead, making the shadows move when nothing else did. He stopped cold. Someone was here. At the far end of the room, half hidden behind a tilted support beam, a figure was crouched low, motionless, silent. She stood up slowly, bracing herself against the wall. Unofficially, he was the guy they sent in when command didn't want to spend too many resources, or when they assumed nothing living remained. Erevan, 9 had gone dark nearly 4 months ago, during the last wave of orbital strikes in the UP-Zalari conflict. It was classified as a listening post, built into the edge of a fractured asteroid field on the border of known space. Nobody expected survivors. Jack didn't expect them either. But the command data was missing. That made it worth checking, even if it was a waste of fuel. He moved through the hallway in silence, sweeping his shoulder lamp across scorched control panels and collapsed support beams. His boots pressed into dust and shattered polymer. There were signs of close-quarter fighting, charred streaks on the walls, scorch marks, shell fragments. He noted blood spatter on one wall, dried and rust-colored. He took a breath and tried not to think too hard about who had bled here. Life support was still mostly down, but the interior temperature had stabilized just above freezing. Better than it had been. Barely survivable. Across the room, Ravlyra sat slumped against the same wall, cradling her thigh. She'd managed to clean the wound using the antiseptic gel Jack had handed over earlier, but she was still in rough shape. Dehydration. Muscle atrophy. That leg needed medical regeneration, something this outpost couldn't offer. She hadn't spoken again since her name. Jack noticed her eyes following him as he worked, wary but no longer hostile. He didn't blame her. She had no reason to trust him. Hell, if their positions were reversed, he probably would have shot first and asked questions later. He took off his helmet, letting his breath fog in the cold air, and set it on the floor. His hair was flattened with sweat. His face was lined from too many hours in the field, too few safe nights of sleep. Still, her skin was pale, and the infection in her thigh hadn't receded much. Jack kept working, keeping his back to her while giving her space to regain composure. The silence between them was no longer charged. It was tired, but shared. "You didn't sleep," she said, voice rough. "I slept in shifts," he replied, glancing back. "Didn't want the generator cutting out again and suffocating us in our sleep." "You're not what I expected from a UPE asset." He returned to the console. "I get that a lot." Ravlyra shifted, suppressing a wince as she sat upright. Her armor chest plate rested beside her, scuffed beyond repair. Beneath it, she wore a simple black thermal undersuit, more practical than military. It clung tightly to her slender frame, scarred and marked by weeks of survival without support. "What happened to your evac protocols?" Jack asked finally. Zalari units had standing orders to fall back after loss of contact. She gave him a tired look. She watched the wall screen flicker to life, static and corrupted log entries scrolling across the display. He asked, without looking up, "You ever decode any of these logs?" "Didn't care to," she replied. "Most were command-level transmissions. The kind you die for, not read." Jack tapped through the files, his brow furrowing. Some of the logs were tagged with encrypted dual authority headers. UPE and Zalari. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "Cross-faction protocols," he muttered. "That shouldn't be here." Ravlyra stiffened. "What kind?" Jack didn't respond at first. He brought up a corrupted data packet, partially reconstructed by the station's onboard AI. "Looks like joint surveillance logs before the war. Border treaty enforcement." Her face tightened. This station was supposed to be listening in on smugglers and rogue miners, not negotiating alliances. Then something changed, Jack said, or someone lied. Its rotors spun silently as it hovered near a bulkhead, scanning debris. Then, without warning, it fired a brief pulse into the floor, test fire. Ravlira saw it too. It's armed. Jack nodded. We can't fight it here. Too narrow. What's the plan? He checked the layout. We reroute power to the decoy relays in storage section 2. Draw it away. Then take it out from the service gantry above. You'll need someone to lure it. Jack looked at her. Not happening. You're barely standing. She narrowed her eyes. I know this station. I can move through the ductways faster than you. I draw it out. You take the shot. I said no. You don't get to decide for me, she snapped. I didn't survive 4 months in this tomb to let someone else die, trying to protect me. They locked eyes. Jack saw no fear in hers, only determination. He gave a short nod. All right, but you stick to the timing. No improvising. She allowed herself the faintest smile. But in that moment, on a forgotten outpost buried in rock and silence, 2 broken survivors found something that no order or treaty could assign: trust. And in the growing quiet, both of them began to believe, for the first time, that they might make it out. Together. A low-frequency hum rippled through the station 3 hours later. Jack's eyes shot open. He'd dozed off in a sitting position, back pressed against the corridor wall. Beside him, Ravlira stirred too, hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. Her body tensed, jaw clenched, not from pain, but from habit. They both listened. Then they heard it, a distinct 3-pulse pattern on Jack's wrist display. The evac ship had received the transmission. The automatic homing beacon was active. They got the signal, Jack said. They'll be in orbit in less than 5 hours. Ravlira didn't smile. She just nodded. We make it to the surface, we're free. Mostly, Jack added. They knew that reaching the surface wouldn't be easy. Ravlira's voice was low, so when the war started, they pretended it never happened. Jack nodded. Exactly. This station held proof that both sides had worked together and abandoned it when it became inconvenient. Maybe that's why the drone was here, to ensure nothing got out. And maybe why there was no extraction protocol, she added. The conclusion hung between them, unspoken but understood. Jack stood. We need to prepare for a worst-case scenario. There may be other kill assets inbound. If they don't detect us, great. But if they do, we're sitting targets. Then we move, she said. Not yet, he countered. We still need that long-range signal. I boosted the auxiliary transmitter during the night. If I patch in the reactor core for 30 seconds, we can push a burst transmission. That'll burn out what's left of the comm array, but the signal should reach my evac ship, assuming it's still on schedule. Jack gave her a look. It's automated. They don't delay. A few seconds later, pressure normalized, and the emergency lights inside flickered off. Jack exhaled, slow and hard. They were alive. He looked over at Ravlira. Her face was pale, but calm. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from sheer exhaustion. He could see how much she was holding in. The strain of 4 months buried in a war grave. The drone, the climb, the shot through vacuum. It all sat behind her eyes, contained, but still burning. You all right? He asked. No, she replied. Jack gave a nod. Honest answer. The hatch opened above them with a hiss. A pair of med drones floated down, scanning their vitals, then transmitting silent recommendations. Jack ignored the machine chatter and climbed out first, offering a hand to Ravlira. She hesitated a beat, then took it. They entered the evac ship's narrow corridors. Clean, cold, sterile, too quiet. After the chaos of Erevan 9, the silence was disorienting. You sure you trust me to fly this thing? She asked. No, he said, but I'm done doing this alone. The pod launched with a sharp crack of ignition. The station fell away beneath them. Through the viewport, Erevan 9 grew smaller, just another corpse in the long history of forgotten wars. But in that pod, side by side, they weren't soldiers. Not anymore. They were survivors. And ahead of them, finally, was something new. The pod shook violently as it pierced the upper atmosphere, rattling like it might tear apart at any second. Jack gripped the harness straps tight across his chest. Beside him, Ravlira gritted her teeth, Her fingers curled into the seat's edge. The internal dampeners were old, worn from neglect, but functional, just enough to keep the impact from turning their bones into splinters. The display blinked green. Docking alignment successful. A low thunk echoed through the cabin as the pod clamped onto the underside of the UP evac ship. Her armor was Zalari military issue, worn, ash-covered, and cracked along one shoulder. Her helmet was missing. Her hair was matted and pulled back into a tight braid, skin pale violet with bluish undertones. A deep gash cut across her upper thigh, wrapped hastily in blood-soaked bandage cloth. She looked dehydrated, malnourished, and completely ready to shoot him. Her rifle shook in her grip, but it was aimed steady at his chest. "Move and I kill you," she said. Her voice was rough, not from anger, more from fatigue. Her eyes, a faded silver, were unfocused and sunken from exhaustion. She had probably been surviving on emergency rations and recycled water for weeks. Jack held still. "I'm not your enemy," he said evenly. "Name's Jack Halden. Recovery detail. I'm here for the station logs. Your UPE. Yeah, not frontline. Just an engineer." Her eyes narrowed. "Why are you alone?" Jack hesitated, then answered truthfully. Command figured this place was empty. They didn't want to waste the fuel. A beat passed. Her hand trembled slightly on the weapon. "You're 4 months too late," she muttered. "Not my call." He slowly lowered his weapon to the ground and stepped back from it. Her rifle stayed up. "I'm not armed anymore. You don't look like you're in shape for another fight. I don't need to be in shape to pull a trigger." Her voice cracked on the last word. Jack studied her, the way she favored her right leg, the dry blood under her fingernails, the hollow tone in her voice. She wasn't bluffing, but she wasn't okay either. "You're injured," he said. "Not your concern. It is if you want to live through the next 48 hours. He opened a compartment on his belt and slowly pulled out a sterile med pack. He didn't move toward her, just held it in his open palm. She didn't move, didn't lower the rifle. Minutes passed like that, tense, silent. Emergency rungs led to the top, a 100-meter climb through low gravity and loose debris. Jack went first, clearing the way. She followed, slower, one step at a time. Halfway up, a tremor hit. The shaft groaned. Debris fell. A large panel gave way above them. "Hold on," Jack shouted. Ravlira grabbed a support brace as a steel beam slid down the shaft, scraping past her shoulder and nearly slamming into her head. Jack swung over and caught her wrist just in time, bracing her weight with both hands. She was slipping. Her damaged leg wasn't holding. Her oxygen cable was snagged. "I've got you," he shouted. She shook her head, teeth clenched. "You'll fall too. Shut up and hold on," he growled, repositioning himself. With one last pull, he dragged her onto the narrow maintenance platform, both of them panting in silence. She looked at him through the faceplate. "You're insane." "You're welcome." At the top of the shaft, the manual override panel blinked red. "You think we had working shuttles after the third strike? We were cut off. Supplies gone. Communications burned. I stayed because no one else made it out." Jack looked away, jaw tight. She wasn't exaggerating. The station's launch bays were caved in. He'd seen that on entry. The wreckage outside proved her claim. He pulled up a diagnostics menu and checked the comm tower interface. "Main relays blown. I might be able to patch into the short-range uplink. Ping my ship once it cycles back over this hemisphere." Ravlira leaned against the bulkhead. "And if the ship doesn't return? It's scheduled. 60-hour loop. Automated beacon should trigger extraction once I confirm signal." She studied him. "And if I wasn't here? If you didn't find me?" Jack met her eyes. "I'd still wait. I don't leave behind functioning systems or people." She said nothing. They fell back into silence as he worked. Jack connected the external controller to bypass the lock. The surface door groaned open, revealing a long tunnel of fractured rock and steel that ended at the hangar floor, mostly exposed to vacuum, but still intact. The evac ship wouldn't land. It would hover just above the surface, and they'd have to use the launch pod to reach it. "One shot." Jack pointed. "We have to cross the hangar, reach the pod launcher, and fire it before the evac window closes." "No time for hesitation," she said, checking her weapon. Exactly. They moved through the tunnel, stepping over shattered beams and melted plating. As they emerged onto the hangar floor, Jack looked up. The stars were visible through a collapsed section of ceiling, cold, distant, but there. And above them, drifting into position, was the evac ship. Its signal ping confirmed arrival. Jack activated the launcher's primary sequence. Ravlira limped into position beside him, checking her suit seal one final time. They spent the rest of the flight in silence. Not awkward, not empty, just quiet. The kind of quiet that only comes after a storm. Hours later, the outpost came into view through the main window, a small orbital facility above New Terra. Neutral ground, demilitarized zone, a place where no one cared what uniform you once wore, only whether you could still stand. As the docking clamps engaged, Ravlira looked toward Jack. What happens after this? We get off the ship, he said. We tell our stories. And then we decide. Decide what? If the war's really over. For us. She nodded. Then softly, I hope it is. Jack turned to her. We've already started making peace. We just didn't realize it until now. The ship docked. The hatch opened. And together, they walked out, past the trauma, past the debris, past the politics, into something neither of them had allowed themselves to hope for in years. A future. The outpost was quiet in a way that unnerved Jack. 32 years old and already feeling older than that. War and isolation age people in ways no calendar could track. You've been here. How long? He asked, not looking at her directly. She hesitated, then replied with a dry rasp. 123 days. Jack turned his head. Alone. A slow nod. He sat down on the floor opposite her, back against a dead console. Your team. Killed. Most in the first week. Some later. We thought reinforcements were coming. They didn't. He let that sit. It explained the fortified inner doors, the empty ration lockers, the handmade barricades in the hallway. They'd held out until they couldn't. What kept you going, he asked. Ravlira looked up. Her voice, though still hoarse, was steady now. Orders. Pride. Habit. I don't know anymore. Jack rested his head against the wall and exhaled slowly. That answer hit closer than he expected. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, real. Ravlira leaned back, her gaze drifting to the cracked ceiling above. A few feet away, the heater unit he'd repaired kicked on. A faint orange glow spread across the floor. She let herself sink against the wall, her body relaxing by degrees. Jack checked her wound again. It had stopped bleeding, but the swelling was worse than before. She didn't stop him when he moved closer and examined it. You need protein, fluids, heat. I've rationed everything, down to insect paste. He reached into his pack, pulled out a sealed UPE ration bar, and offered it to her. She hesitated, then took it, bit off a corner like she expected it to be poison. It's not great, he said, but it won't kill you. She chewed slowly, mechanical. Then, tastes like chemicals. Because it is. He sat back. His hands were covered in grime. His body ached from tension and cold, but he felt something loosening in his chest. Maybe it was her presence. Maybe it was the way she hadn't collapsed. The silence of peace. Jack Halden stood at the edge of the balcony, arms resting on the railing, watching as a pair of off-world shuttles glided silently across the horizon. He wore no uniform, no badge, just a worn gray field jacket and civilian trousers. His eyes were clearer now, the exhaustion still there, but no longer etched so deep. His wounds had started to heal, not just the visible ones. Behind him, the soft sound of the door sliding open made him turn. Ravlira stepped out. She was dressed in simple civilian attire, dark slacks, fitted jacket, light tunic beneath. The colors neutral. Her posture relaxed. The difference in her was subtle, but real. Her shoulders weren't as tight. Her expression not as guarded. The bruises under her skin were gone. And for the first time since he'd met her, she wasn't wearing armor. She wasn't defending herself. She joined him at the railing. They finalized my status this morning, she said. Civilian clearance. The silence returned. But now it felt different. What happens now? She asked quietly. Jack didn't have a scripted answer. He gave her the truth. We wait until my ship returns orbit side in 2 days. How about a stabilized power? See if I can get the long-range beacon back online. When it's ready, we leave. Together. And if your people don't want me on that ship, they'll deal with it. You'd risk that. You've survived this long. That's more than most. You're not a threat. You're a survivor. She looked away, absorbing that. He added, I don't follow orders as strictly as I used to. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That makes two of us. Jack leaned back against the cold wall, rubbing his hands for warmth. Her breathing had evened out. She was watching him less now. Maybe that meant she was starting to feel safe again. Or maybe just tired. They didn't speak again that night. They sat under the dim glow of failing lights, surrounded by wreckage and silence. After the ceasefire, some factions didn't deactivate their long-range scouts. Think it's from your side? No, he said. UPE gear wouldn't be running this deep without command tracking. She pulled herself to her feet, limping slightly but holding herself steady. Then it's a rogue. Or worse, Jack muttered. It might be a scavenger drone running kill protocols. They moved quickly. He retrieved his rifle. She slung hers over her shoulder. The pain in her leg was obvious, but she didn't ask for help. They exited the ops deck and moved down the dark corridor, following the blinking red marker on Jack's wrist unit. The air grew colder again. Jack felt the weight of the station pressing down on them. Metal, silence, and uncertainty. They stopped near the maintenance hub. Jack crouched beside a blown-out access door and held up a hand. He tapped into the sensor feed. A small visual popped into view. A drone, black, boxy, marked with no visible insignia. They stood side by side, the breeze brushing against their faces. She shifted slightly, her arm touching his. There was no tension, no withdrawal. Just warmth. You never asked me what I was before the war, she said suddenly. He glanced at her. What were you? A singer. On Vyrek Station. I only joined the military after the first raids. We all did. But before that, I used to stand in front of hundreds of people and just sing. Jack smiled faintly. I'd like to hear it sometime. You wouldn't understand the language. I'd still listen. She studied his face for a long moment. Maybe I'll sing again, if things stay quiet. He nodded. Then I hope they do. More silence followed. Not awkward. Not searching. Just complete. Finally, she spoke again. Jack, why did you help me? Really? He didn't answer immediately. He looked out at the ocean, then back at her. Because when I found you, you reminded me of what I used to believe in. That we're more than our uniforms. The recording showed Ravlira and 6 other soldiers in the early days of their occupation. They were younger, in full gear, confident. She looked different. Eyes sharp, voice strong. They were arguing about pulling out, citing new orders from Central Command. But she insisted on staying. Jack listened. She had chosen to hold Erevan, 9 even after being authorized to withdraw. He shut the file down. She hadn't just survived. She had stayed behind by choice. Loyalty? Stubbornness? Or something else? When he returned to the room, she was adjusting the torn seal on her thigh guard. He said nothing at first, then sat beside her. I saw the recording, he said. Her hand stopped moving. You could have left. I could have, she said. Why didn't you? She stared forward for a moment. Because command didn't deserve the truth. This station was more than they claimed. I knew someone would come for it. I just didn't think it would take this long. Jack nodded slowly. I wasn't planning to die today. They split off in opposite directions, tension climbing with every step. For the first time since they met, they moved like a team, fractured, unspoken, but synced by necessity. Their war had ended months ago, but something else had just begun. Not just survival, but the first steps toward reclaiming who they were before everything fell apart. The drone didn't hesitate. The moment Ravlira tripped the decoy relay in Storage Sector 2, it pivoted midair and darted down the corridor toward the noise, scanning aggressively for movement. Jack watched its trajectory from the gantry above, rifle braced on the steel crossbeam, finger resting against the trigger guard. He waited for the signal, a soft buzz in his earpiece. Ravlira's voice, controlled but sure of breath. It's passing Section 2. 2 seconds. Jack exhaled, steadying his aim. You're not afraid they'll judge you? They already have. But I know what matters. She leaned in, her voice just above a whisper. And what matters now? Jack answered without hesitation. That we get a second chance. Not as soldiers. As people. They stood there, watching New Terra's light shift across the planet's curve. No orders. No rank. No weapons. Only the quiet realization that survival had turned into something else. They weren't just the last ones out of Erevan 9. They were the first to walk into the future side by side. 2 weeks later, the sky over New Terra was bright, cloudless, and full of promise. A soft wind swept over the balcony of the civilian recovery complex, high above the oceanic surface. The facility's architecture was minimalist: white stone, matte steel, clear glass, all designed to calm the mind, to distance its residents from the war-torn past. But what mattered wasn't the design. It was the silence. Not the silence of abandonment. She looked down, as if realizing how little she'd really known about her posting. My orders were to defend Erevan 9 at all costs. We assumed it was strategic. It might have been, Jack said, but not for the reasons either side believed. Ravlira exhaled through her nose. So all this, she gestured around them, at the blood, at the wreckage, at the corpses buried under decks, was because someone wanted to protect something we didn't even understand. Jack shut the console. Seems that way. A sharp klaxon buzzed suddenly, making both of them jump. Jack turned back to the panel, eyes wide. Motion sensor just tripped. Ravlira reached for her weapon, now lying nearby on the floor. How close? Outer ring. Maintenance corridor, he said, scanning the feed. Could be structural collapse, but the sensor data says it's heat signature. Not natural. Scavenger drone? She asked. Jack frowned. Possible. Or a rogue recon unit. On his forearm display, a faint blue arc flickered, outgoing signal sent. Now we wait. They collapsed back into the corridor, back to the temporary safety of the maintenance room. Jack ran another full system scan, confirming no other drones on immediate approach. As they sat shoulder to shoulder, Jack asked the question that had nagged at him since they met. Why didn't you give up? She didn't respond right away. I thought about it. Every day. But then I'd hear a sound, metal shifting, a pressure seal releasing, and I'd think, maybe someone's coming. She looked at him, her voice steadier now. Then you did. Jack nodded slowly, and for the first time since they met, Ravlira leaned her head against his shoulder. No words, no tension, just a quiet acknowledgement of shared survival. The war had erased many things: command chains, loyalties, identities. She nodded. They set to work. She directed him through the reactor maintenance route. Narrow, pressure-damaged crawl spaces she knew by memory. The old scars of battle showed everywhere. Blood splatters, crushed tools, makeshift barricades. As they moved, Ravlira spoke. My unit, they died in this section. We held the control room until our ammo ran out. Jack paused. How many of you? 7. We held out for 6 days before the last airlock ruptured. I survived because I was on rotation near the food storage. I wasn't even supposed to be there. Her voice didn't shake, but her hands did. She kept moving anyway. They reached the reactor junction. Jack opened the access panel and hooked in his external capacitor. 30 seconds, he said. You sure you want to be here when it pulses? She gave him a look. I've been here through worse. The generator groaned to life. Lights surged, then dimmed again. Jack activated the transmission beacon. You stayed to protect the data. She glanced at him. At first. Later, I stayed because I didn't want to die for a lie. If I had to go, I wanted it to be on my terms. Jack let that settle in his mind. You ever regret it? Every single day, she said quietly. And I'd do it again. They met each other's gaze. No judgment, just understanding. When the hour passed, Jack helped her into a reinforced exosuit. She winced with every movement, but didn't complain. He adjusted the oxygen lines and checked the seal pressure. Her breathing was steady. You ready for this? He asked. No, she said, but we go anyway. The journey to the access shaft was slow. The corridors were tighter here, the station groaning around them with every step. Lights flickered less now. Power was draining fast. By the time they reached the lift tunnel, Jack had to boost Ravlira up onto the first platform. The shaft was dark, vertical, and steep. So what are you now? Jack hesitated, then answered with quiet finality. Someone who doesn't leave people behind anymore. Silence settled between them again, but this time it felt earned. The medbot completed its scans and applied regenerative foam to her leg. The swelling would recede in hours. The infection was already clearing. She lay there, eyes drifting toward the ceiling, voice barely above a whisper. When I woke up, every morning on that station, I kept waiting to stop feeling anything, to finally go numb. But every time, something stopped me. Jack said nothing, just listened. Sometimes it was the sound of the walls groaning. Sometimes it was a ration wrapper. One day it was your voice. He looked at her. That's what saved me, Halden. Not just your hands. Not just the med pack. The fact that you spoke like I still mattered. Jack leaned back in the chair, arms crossed over his chest. You do. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The crew was automated, save for a single operator, an older man, seated at the control terminal, running diagnostics. He didn't stand, just glanced over his shoulder and raised an eyebrow. Didn't expect a +1, he said. Jack replied calmly. She's not a guest. She's coming with us. The operator leaned back. You know how this works. We're 10 hours from the nearest outpost. UPE protocol. Aliens get flagged. Jack stepped forward, then changed the protocol. She's not a prisoner. She's a survivor. The operator studied Ravlira. She didn't flinch. She didn't speak. Her stare held steady. Name, the man asked. Ravlira, she said. Zalari, former Dominion military. I held Erevan, 9, when your people left it to rot. The man blinked. Well, guess that clears the mystery about the missing signal logs. Jack lowered his voice. She's the only reason I got out of there alive. If she's not safe on this ship, neither am I. That paused the conversation. The operator finally nodded. Fine. Temporary civilian status. But you'll both be debriefed at Outpost Command. Jack nodded. Understood. Ravlira looked at him as they walked toward the med bay. You didn't have to defend me. Yes, I did. They reached the clean, white walls of the ship's medical compartment. The AI immediately flagged her injuries and initiated treatment. Jack sat nearby as she lay back on the stabilizer table, a warm field of light washing over her leg. Her voice was quieter now. You know they'll separate us when we land. Probably. Interrogate me. Possibly detain me. Possibly. You're not worried? Jack leaned forward. I'm tired of seeing the wrong people blamed. You stayed behind when no one else would. That says more than any report they'll try to file. She gave a short breath, part scoff, part surprise. Most UPE soldiers wouldn't speak like that. I stopped being one a long time ago. She studied him again, and her voice dropped. Good, Ravlira said, because I'm out of breath and out of patience. Jack allowed himself a brief smile. When they regrouped near the control corridor, she was leaning against the bulkhead, visibly winded. Her undersuit clung to her skin, damp from exertion. She looked pale but proud, still upright, still alive. He handed her a water ration, which she took without a word. They both sat down in silence. A few minutes passed before she finally spoke again. Why would a rogue drone patrol an abandoned site? This place was written off. Jack didn't answer immediately. He had the same question. It wasn't just monitoring, he said. It was scanning for signals. Maybe looking for residual command codes. Maybe for survivors. Or loose ends, she muttered. That silence returned, thicker this time. Ravlira glanced at the wreckage through the open hatch. You think there are others? She asked. Other drones? Other watchers? Jack shook his head. Not like that one. Jack motioned to Ravlira. She comes with me. That's not protocol. She's not staying alone in some holding cell. She's not being detained, the man replied. She'll be processed separately. She'll be comfortable. That wasn't the point. The official offered a thin, practiced smile. Mr. Halden, the system still has structure. That structure is how we avoid repeating the mistakes of the war. Ravlira touched Jack's arm. Let me go. Jack looked at her, unsure. She added, softer, let them process what they need. If they wanted me gone, they'd have done it in orbit. He nodded, not because he trusted the system, but because he trusted her judgment. She followed the official down another corridor. No cuffs, no threats, but her steps were slow. Jack didn't like watching her walk away. 3 hours passed, in the debriefing room. They asked him everything: station condition, drone activity, structural logs, data integrity. Then the questions turned. They believe you? I think they believed you. Jack nodded. You could request political asylum. I could, she said. They offered. And I'm thinking about it. They stood in silence a moment longer. She glanced at him. What will you do now? Jack let the question hang. I don't know, he said. I've been moving for so long, I forgot what standing still felt like. Ravlira considered that. You could rest. He met her eyes. Only if you do too. She didn't smile, not exactly. But her shoulders eased. Her voice lowered. They said I could take quarters here. Neutral zone. Civilian status, pending full review. That's a start. They asked if I knew anyone to sponsor the petition. Jack raised an eyebrow. What did you say? I said yes. A beat passed. Was I the name you gave? You're the only one who didn't leave me behind, she said. He nodded, emotion tight in his chest. Then we do this together. Ravlira stepped closer, looking directly at him. Jack Halden checked the oxygen gauge on his forearm display. 98 minutes left in the tank. He adjusted the seal on his helmet, then stepped through the battered outer airlock of Aravanine. The door resisted, grinding open with a hollow screech. He waited until the decompression cycle finished, then moved into the corridor with cautious, deliberate steps. The interior was worse than the satellite scans had suggested. A dim emergency light pulsed somewhere above, casting harsh flashes across the hallway. Dust floated in the low-gravity air. Debris was everywhere: twisted panels, scorched wiring, shattered bulkhead seams. It smelled like burnt insulation and rusted metal, even through the helmet filter. Jack exhaled slowly. This was his third recovery assignment since the ceasefire. His official role: field engineer, systems recovery, data salvage. They were 20 feet apart, but it felt closer. He began running diagnostics on what was left of the station's power grid. Just enough to bring emergency systems online. Enough heat to keep her from freezing. Enough light to remind her she wasn't buried alive. He worked without speaking. She watched him silently, head tilted, eyes dull but alert. Neither of them trusted the other yet. But the guns were down, and for now, that was enough. Outside, the broken sky of the Aravan asteroid field turned slowly in the blackness. Inside, one man and one alien woman began to relearn how to exist without pointing a weapon first. The war was over. Survival, however, was still very real. The station's lights buzzed to life in uneven pulses, casting unstable shadows along the floor and walls. Jack Halden adjusted the output levels on the temporary power junction he'd cobbled together from scavenged relays and half-melted fuses. A dull hum returned to the corridor. Eventually, she reached for the med pack with shaking hands, never taking her eyes off him. Jack watched her fingers fumble with the seal. She was clumsy, not from panic, but because she was weak. He crouched slowly, giving her space. "What's your name?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, finally, Ravlira. The name matched no survivor list from Zalari Command, which meant she'd been left for dead. Jack felt a tight, knot form in his chest. "Ravlira," he said carefully, "you fought the good fight." Her grip on the rifle slackened a little. "But you're not alone anymore." Her jaw tightened. She looked away, then leaned back against the bulkhead and closed her eyes. The weapon finally dropped to her side. Jack didn't press further. He didn't ask questions about her unit. He didn't mention the war. He just sat quietly on the other side of the wrecked room, between the remains of a shattered console and a collapsed vent pipe. Ravlira spoke again after a long pause. "Why'd they send you?" This station was declared unviable. Jack glanced at the blinking lights on his wrist display. Data node flagged a corrupted transmission loop. They wanted to know if anything valuable survived. Probably command codebooks, encryption keys, pre-strike fleet logs. Same crap they always want. And they sent you alone? They assumed it was empty. He shrugged. Low risk, low priority. They were wrong. She narrowed her eyes. "You're not just an engineer." Jack didn't answer. After a beat, she continued. "You move like someone who's been shot at before." "Once or twice," he admitted. "Serve in a combat engineering unit. First 3 years of the war." She studied him in silence. "Why'd you leave?" she asked. He thought about lying, then didn't. Lost people. Stopped sleeping. Realized I was better at fixing machines than fixing what the war broke in me. Not as enemies, not as strangers, but something in between. The war hadn't ended in a treaty signing, at least not for people like them. For them, it ended in places like this, in forgotten stations buried in ash and silence, where survival required more than a weapon. It required someone willing to stay. And for now, Jack Halden was staying. The following morning, or what passed for morning inside the dead station, Jack Halden was already up, crouched over the wall panel near the central relay junction. He tapped lines of code into a grimy touchscreen, rerouting what little power the backup generator could push through the cracked grid. Most of the lights in the corridor beyond the ops deck were fried, but he had managed to bring life to the station's main console for diagnostics. Behind him, Ravlira stirred slowly under the emergency blanket he'd offered her the night before. Her breathing had deepened overnight, no longer strained. The drone drifted into the open space below, scanning an empty corridor now lit by flickering red emergency lights. It paused, uncertain. Then Jack fired. The EMP round struck center mass. A burst of crackling energy exploded through its shell, tearing through its core. The drone jerked mid-air, spiraled, then crashed into the floor with a hard metallic slam. Sparks sputtered out from the fractured hull. Jack stayed in position for 5 more seconds, in case it was baiting a second-wave protocol. Nothing moved. He swung his legs over the beam and dropped down. His boots hit the floor with a sharp impact. He moved to the wreckage, rifle ready, and inspected the remains. No secondary detonation. Good. The model was older than he'd expected. Mid-war tech, heavily modified, stripped of insignia. Likely repurposed by a splinter cell or rogue scavengers. But what was it doing out here days from any active zone? His earpiece crackled again. "Is it dead?" "Dead enough," Jack replied. "But something's off. That drone wasn't running standard patrol logic. It had a kill protocol ready before it confirmed identification." She looked at him, a question in her eyes. He answered before she asked. "Yes, it would have fired on either of us." She processed that quietly. Jack leaned back, hands resting on his knees. "There's something else I haven't told you." Her expression sharpened. "I accessed deeper sectors of the command logs. There's data here that doesn't match this station's known purpose. Cross-sign keys from both Zalari High Command and UPE Central Intelligence. There was a covert pact before the war. Erevan 9 was part of it." She frowned. "I thought it was a listening post." "It was, but not just that. This place hosted joint surveillance operations on third-party factions. Pirates, independent traders, mercenary guilds operating across disputed space. Then, when tensions escalated, the government scrubbed the cooperation files. The only surviving access shaft was half-collapsed and exposed a vacuum. It would require sealing suits and a manual override on the surface hatch. Not impossible, but with her leg injury, it would be close to it." Jack stood, stretching the stiffness out of his spine, and ran a final diagnostic on his portable systems. Oxygen packs, 2 full, 1 backup. Ammo, low but usable. Emergency shelter pod, intact, if barely. He turned to her. "We move in 1 hour. You rest. I'll prep the gear." She didn't argue. Her body was still recovering, and she knew she needed every ounce of strength. As Jack stepped into the adjacent corridor to check the oxygen recyclers, something caught his eye. A storage panel cracked open, faint light glowing inside. He paused, then slowly approached, weapon drawn. Inside was a recording node, Zalari tech, old but functional. It blinked, still active. Jack tapped the interface. A video file loaded. Static, then motion. "More than what they turned us into. And I couldn't let the last part of you die there. Not when I still had something left to give." She swallowed hard. "Then I guess I should tell you something," she said. "You didn't just save me. You brought me back." He reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand in his. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. No grand gestures. Just 2 people who had fought, bled, and survived, finding in each other what war had tried to erase. They stood there on the balcony until the sun dipped beneath the horizon. Not as enemies, not as soldiers, as something new, together. And for the first time in years, both of them finally felt at peace. The war was over. The past laid to rest. And the future, uncertain, quiet, unarmed, was waiting. But they would face it side by side. Did you encounter Zalari hostiles? No. Did you observe any sabotage? No. Were you coerced in any way to aid a Dominion combatant? Jack leaned forward, tired of the game. She's not a combatant anymore. She's a survivor. She saved my life more than once. You want a recommendation? Here it is. If we're serious about peace, we don't start it by isolating the people who upheld it better than we did. They didn't push further after that. When he was finally released, he stepped into the facility's common level, scanning the sea of faces. Refugees, soldiers, bureaucrats, families, people trying to resume what was left of life. He spotted her near the far wall. Ravlira stood at a large window, watching the surface of New Terra far below. The planet was mostly ocean, but the colony lights sparkled across the night side. Her posture was still, composed. He walked up beside her. No guards, he noted. No threats, she replied. They asked questions. I gave answers. Travel allowed within UPE territories. He glanced at her. That fast. I think your report helped. He smirked. I may have added a few convincing paragraphs. I read it, she said. You made me sound like a hero. You were. She looked away, her voice softening. You didn't mention the part where I almost shot you. You didn't pull the trigger. That's the part that matters. A short silence passed. I've been offered a placement, she added. Field logistics on an agricultural moon. They said they need people who understand hardship. Sounds peaceful. That's what I'm afraid of. He turned toward her more fully. You could try it. Quiet doesn't mean empty. Sometimes it's where people finally start again. And you? She asked. Jack hesitated. I don't know yet. I thought about taking a transport job. Maybe small-scale security work. I'm not ready to sit still forever, but you don't want to fight anymore. He nodded. Not unless it's for something real.